Hey friends, it's Sophie Ing from Sprinkle with Soil and the Homesteading Lender. Welcome back to the next episode of the Call to Farms podcast. This episode is one that's been building for over 14 years, basically for as long as I've been a mom. Because back when I first started digging into food and trying to understand what was nourishing and what wasn't, the very first ingredient that I was looking into was salt. I grew up with Morton's iodized salt, like most Asian households. That blue container was in every kitchen, and we used a lot of it. But once I started really looking into the food that we were putting into our bodies, salt was the very first thing that I swapped. And because if we're using it every day on everything, it better be clean and it better be real. So this curiosity led me down a path of questioning sourcing, not just for salt, but for everything: our oils, our grains, our meats, our minerals. And I've carried that same lens into this conversation today. Today, I'm joined by Michael Sileck, the Chief Mineral Officer at both Baja Gold Salt Company and C90, two companies that are bringing incredibly mineral-rich, unrefined sea salts to both in the kitchen and the soil. Now, some of you know that I have a very long-standing relationship with Redmond's Real Salt. And yes, I still love and use Redmond's. But here's the thing. I'm not married to just one salt or one brand, and I never have been. Because in our health, in our soils, in our guts, diversity is everything. And just like the way that we rotate our crops, we diversify our microbes and vary what we feed our families, we need to diversify our mineral sources too. And that's what this episode is all about. We are here to get informed, to source better, to think critically, and to layer abundance into our bodies and our farms. And yes, we talk about lead because I know that's the first question a lot of you have when it comes to sea salt. So I hit it right out of the gate. Michael and I go deep on the testing, the context, and what it really means when people see lead mentioned on a mineral report. This is a conversation that expands the salt conversation without fear, without dogma, and without a certain brand. Because at the end of the day, you are the one feeding your soil, your animals, and your family. And you deserve to be equipped with the whole picture. So whether you're curious and a newbie, or you've still got some Morton salt in the pantry, this is a judgment-free zone. Just a grounded conversation about real salt, real sourcing, and real nourishment. So let's dive in with Michael, the Chief Mineral Officer of Baja Gold and C90. All right, Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right, everybody, I'm really excited to introduce you to Michael Sileck. He's with Baja Gold Salt Company, but also with C90, which I wasn't familiar with until I started playing around with Korean natural farming and was so grateful to find C90 as one of the products. So, Michael, thank you for coming. I think it's 8 o'clock at night on a Monday night. We'll just talk.
Fantastic.
One of the things that I often hear about and I get a lot of questions about is often about the lead content. And I'd love to hear more about how Baja Gold Salt Company and your products rank on the lead consumption.
Of course, it's a very popular topic right now. A lot of discussion going on online about it. Just by way of introduction, so Baja Gold and C90 Ocean Minerals are 100% unrefined, solar dried mineral sea salts. So they are heritage style crafted sea salts. We originate in the Sea of Cortez, and so we have a elevated mineral and trace element content and actually a lower natural sodium level than most other natural sea salts. One of the things that we found with scientific advancement, as you can test at lower and lower thresholds for things, is that these heavy metals, and really all elements, but these heavy metals, because they are of particular interest, are present in many more things than perhaps we originally thought. What's interesting, though, is that they are present in forms that are not the same as the industrially created man-made forms of lead and some of these other heavy metals. So what I mean by that is there's naturally elemental lead within our soils. There's elemental lead and other heavy metals within our waterways, within marine life, but these are at parts per billion, which is a very minute quantity relative to both what you consume and relative to the total volume of things. And there's been a lot of discussion around hundreds of parts per billion. And there is a way to frame numbers in a way that makes them seem a little bit perhaps more frightening than they truly are. Parts per billion is actually not an absolute value, it's a percentage of a whole. And so when you look at something that's 100 parts per billion, for instance, it doesn't mean that there's 100 of anything. It is just, and I'll check my math on this, I think it's 0.00001% of the whole to get to parts per billion there. So you would then have to multiply that by whatever it is that you are consuming. So I say all of this as a precursor. Baja Gold is 100% natural. It's an unrefined sea salt. We do not add anything to it, and we do not take anything away from it as nature and as God created it. So there are very minute amounts of naturally occurring heavy metals. We do a robust amount of testing to make sure that they stay within the range that we have seen historically and consistently for many years. And when you look at the net quantity of salt that one would consume, the amount of that naturally occurring element is significantly below not only all regulatory standards, but any sort of concerning level from a human consumption standpoint. And so I know it is something that people take very seriously. They feed this salt, they feed salts and foods to their families. I can reassure everyone Baja Gold is very healthy and safe to consume. My 3 children eat Baja Gold every single day, and they're doing great. And it is a naturally occurring sea salt created the same way that humans have used unrefined sea salt really for millennia. And so if you go back to Roman times and even before then, unrefined sea salt was the only way that we had sea salt for the human populace. And I like to say, knock on wood, but if this was a problem, it would have been a problem thousands and thousands of years ago. And it is not. It is very safe and healthy. And just to put some numbers behind it, if you want to feel a little bit more comfortable with it, 1 serving of Baja Gold has less lead in it than a sweet potato, than a serving of spinach, than kale, quinoa, regular russet potatoes, and various other leafy greens and root vegetables. That's the status there. We do a robust amount of third-party testing and post that to our website as well. So I encourage everyone to visit that. We have baja.gold/lab reports, and then we have a robust write-up with a lot of this information under our blog as well. I like that we jumped right into the hot seat here, but that's the story. And if anyone has any questions at all, they can call our family. We're a family business. You can speak with me, you can speak with our team, or we can trade emails, and we will make sure that you are very comfortable with all the data and information that we can provide.
Thank you so much, Michael. I know I jumped right into it. I didn't shy away from it. I did give you a little bit of warning, but not that much for you to prepare that perfect presentation there. And I appreciate that because I've looked into quite a bit of the concern that was made and the type of testing. I think what I came away from all of it, though, is the fact that it is unrefined. It's naturally occurring trace minerals, lead being one of them, that is a seemingly a topic of concern or a mineral of concern right now. And I think it's due to a lot of like influencer marketing, right? And ill-informed, misinformed. So I think with that, though, one of the things that I would say a little bit more concerning for me than the naturally occurring lead would be any trace and contaminants like microplastics or industrial runoff that maybe the Sea of Cortez might have access to. Can you speak more about that and maybe the ocean environment that we have today? Because maybe it might not have been such a concern thousands of years ago, but I am concerned about microplastics today.
Absolutely. It's a totally fair concern. And in addition to heavy metal testing, mineral testing, we do a robust amount of contaminant testing as well. You touched on a couple of things there. So I can confirm that Baja Gold and C90 are tested for pesticides, including glyphosate.
Yep.
And there's an array of tests that we run from a couple of our lab testing partners that captures a lot of, frankly, words that I can't pronounce because they're chemicals and things of that nature. And Baja Gold is clean and clear of all of those. Those are posted on our website for people to take a look at. And then from a microplastic standpoint, so the unfortunate reality is that microplastics have become ubiquitous around our world. They are present in our airways, in our waterways, in our soils. We're starting to see them in marine life and even in land-based life. We do not necessarily say that Baja Gold is guaranteed to be microplastic free. And I think that's because we want to be transparent about the amount of control and the amount of just in batch by batch level of control that we can truly provide. The reason I say that is when there are studies that show that microplastics are in the air, it is really hard for any manufacturer to say with 100% certainty that microplastics are not in their products. And so what we do, and what I can confirm for everyone listening, is that we have a triple filtration system that goes down to 1 micron and below before water enters into our ponds for dehydration. We have removed all plastic components from our bagging and production facilities that could possibly leach plastic into the product. So getting back to that idea of not adding anything into the product as well, wherever and whenever possible, we use food grade stainless steel and food grade metal materials. And we do as much precautionary steps along the way to make sure that we are providing a clean and clear product for consumers to enjoy. With that in mind, actually earlier this week, there was a report done on microplastics testing for a variety of different brands, and Baja Gold did test negative for microplastics in that test. And that was not our test that was run, but we did see that posted. And so we were pleased to see those results. I think that is a testament to some of the work that our team is doing from a purity and quality standpoint.
Yeah, no, I love to hear that. That's very reassuring. Can you walk me through the process of how each salt is processed? I think you were just beginning to talk about it and how it's harvested, but you also said it was sun-dried. Are they rinsed or treated in any way?
It's a great question. Yes. So Baja Gold and C90 at their core are 100% unrefined solar dried sea salts, and that's it. So the beauty of what we do is we have identified a very unique location in the world that has 5 different geological factors that help us produce a clean and mineral rich sea salt. And just to take listeners through it, we are located on the eastern part of the Baja Peninsula, which is the western part of the Sea of Cortez. So if you think about the North American continent and you go down to mainland Mexico, to the left of that is the Sea of Cortez. And then there's this little peninsula essentially hanging out just below California, and that's the Baja Peninsula. And then the reason I say that is there is a very large landmass in between the Sea of Cortez and the Pacific Ocean. And the Sea of Cortez is not the Gulf of Mexico. We're talking about a very unique, very protected and pristine body of water. Where we are located within that body of water, there is no industrial activity. There are not oil rigs or anything of that nature operating. It's a very clean, pristine body of water. The Sea of Cortez was famously known to be very marine life diverse. So there is a significant amount of really unique marine life in the area. Jacques Cousteau once called the Sea of Cortez the world's aquarium because of how many different species there are there. A couple of other different factors that I want to touch on. The tectonic plates where we are located are actually it's called the San Andreas fault line. So there's 2 different tectonic plates in the northern part of the Sea of Cortez, and they open up these rare earth geothermal vents that kind of push up this unique minerality up into the water. And so it's a mineral rich body of water. For many years prior to it being dammed off, the Colorado River also would drain into the Sea of Cortez. And I'm talking hundreds of years ago, but for many thousands of years, it would drain into the Sea of Cortez. And this was before modern agriculture and whatnot. So it was before there were contaminants. So it would bring the mineral content of the Rocky Mountains into the Sea of Cortez. And you would have all of these additional minerals deposited into the Sea of Cortez, also creating a bit of a brine water instead of just a true salt water. You're going to have a brackish water, not a brine water, a brackish water. So the salinity level would actually be reduced a little bit, and that is reflected within the lower natural sodium levels of Baja Gold and C90. So where we have our salt flats are about 8 to 10 miles inland. So we are not harvesting water from the Sea of Cortez, which makes this a much more sustainable process. The lunar tides will actually bring in the Sea of Cortez water over about 8 to 10 miles of alluvial topsoil before it reaches our salt flats. and then it drops down into these salt flats, which are dug into the ground. And the water is then allowed to solar dehydrate for a period of 6 to 10 weeks before it is then harvested and bagged for either agriculture production or for human consumption. We have a robust array of filtration throughout that process as well. But the nice part is you have this natural alluvial topsoil, which is untouched. It's very clean and pristine body kind of area there. And so the water will be filtered through that natural alluvial topsoil. And then we do use man-made filters on the ponds as well to help further reduce any potential contamination. And that's it. So for a majority of our products, that is all of the process. It is, again, harvested and bagged. We have started creating 2 different product lines, one for C90 and a new launch for Baja Gold, where we do a very light air drying of the product. So we tumble the product in a warm air bath, essentially. And what that does is remove a little bit of the moisture from the Baja Gold or the C90, and that allows it to be used in more commercial, professional settings. So on the C90 side, that means you can use it in commercial broadcast spreaders or feed mixers, where a little bit of moisture can really pose challenges for the user. And then on the Baja Gold side, it allows us to start working with more professional grade food producers who need things to flow and work within funnels and chutes and that nature. So it's a really great way for us to start bringing minerality into these other types of environments. But overall, all of our products are 100% natural, 100% unrefined. There's no additives. There's nothing like some of these aluminum-based flowing agents or anything of that nature. It's all very clean. And we try to stay as close to heritage style salt production as possible.
Yes, I know that the way that you are harvesting your salt is more the traditional methods. Okay, so many things in there. So the air drying and with the air bath, is that going to be made available to us consumers?
It is, yes. So we have just launched a shaker on Baja Gold, our website. So previously, Baja Gold, if you're familiar with a Celtic style salt, you know a little bit of that moisture, a little bit of that dampness. It provides that minerality that you're really looking for, but it can be challenging to use in a shaker or a more traditional application. And by removing
without anti-caking agents.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. Yeah. So we didn't want to go that route by any means. So this light air drying, it brings the moisture down from 3 to 4% down to about 1%, which does allow it to be used in shakers. So that is something that you can take a look at. Just to throw some numbers out there, and all this information is available on our website. I'm going to do a quick salt 101, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome. Okay. So most people think about salt as table salt and like the traditional Morton's navy blue canister. Table salt can be made in a variety of different ways, but all of them are processed and refined in a way so that the end result is 99% sodium chloride. And that is done on purpose. They are looking for consistency. They are looking for grain size consistency. They are looking for color consistency. So all of the processing and refining processes, they will be crushing, they will be grinding, they will be sorting for grain size, they will be removing and stripping away mineral content, and they often bleach the product as well. So it is like a perfectly pure white, like bright white color. So that is a very unnatural product. To my knowledge, pure sodium chloride is very rare in the world naturally, if it exists at all. It's very rare to find just pure sodium chloride the way you would find it in table salt. Now, there are also other processes that can be done to table salt, such as the addition of synthetic iodine. You mentioned anti-caking agents. They can add things like that in there. They can use certain methods to form crystal shapes and whatnot. So there's a whole variety of products out there. The other thing to note, and I can talk about this all night, I apologize, but
Great. This is fantastic.
so you have your table salt, and I mentioned you can make this in a couple of different ways. You can create sodium chloride in a lab. You can take like a brine water and dehydrate it out so that you have sodium chloride essentially. And the source of that brine water can come from various different things. But what's also interesting is that you can actually take sea salt that originates as mineral sea salt. If you put it through all of these processes to really strip out everything and be left with only sodium chloride, functionally, it's identical to just brine solution, table salt, or any other way of creating sodium chloride, because elementally, it's just 99% sodium chloride. But what you have to be careful from is if you are big salt, right, and you start with sea salt, you can put sea salt on your package at the end as well, even though elementally that is the same thing as table salt. So that's something to look out for. And it's going to be a common theme here. Just because it says sea salt, all sea salts are not created equal by any means. So it's really important to know more about where did that originate and what happened to it along the way. Not to start throwing brands under the bus or whatnot, but I remember a couple of years ago, Wendy's had a big thing, or we now use sea salt on our fries. And if you look into it, it's not, they were not using Celtic sea salt on their fries or anything like that. It was a heavily processed sea salt. It might have started in the ocean, but in any event, I digress. So
No, I think
anything
that's great.
anything that is just table salt, processed sea salt, 99% sodium chloride, that is going to be in one bucket. The next bucket, and it's a better bucket, it's not the best, but it's a better bucket, is going to be your rock salts or your earth salts. And so the most famous one of these is pink Himalayan. So pink Himalayan salt, essentially there was a free-flowing body of water at some point on planet Earth, and the tectonic plates moved around, the mountains moved around, and captured this body of water. And over time, and we're talking about thousands of years, that body of water dried out and turned into a mine of salt, a salt mine. And then humans would discover this. They would go in and harvest the salt, essentially. Sometimes, particularly pink Himalayan, you have to be careful of using explosives and things of that nature to mine the salt. But that salt has not been processed the way that table salt has, so it still maintains some of those minerals and trace elements. And that's why pink Himalayan salt was a very popular thing over the last 15 to 20 years or so. It had additional minerals versus your traditional table salt, and it had that really cool pink color. So everyone was very excited about pink Himalayan salt. What we found through additional mineral analysis is that the pink color is actually from iron in the surrounding soil leaching into that sea salt. So if you take a look at the iron levels of pink Himalayan salt or similar salts, they are significantly higher than like a Celtic style salt or a Baja Gold or something of that nature. And that's because that iron came from the surrounding soil. So something about that salt attracted it, and then other minerals and trace elements moved in and out of the soil as well. Earth salt, rock salt is a good salt. It's way better than table salt, but it has undergone some transformation in the thousands of years that it's been underground. And then the final category, the best category, is going to be an unrefined mineral sea salt that is created using heritage style techniques. For many years, the gold standard of this was Celtic sea salt. They're the most famous, that little blue bag that everyone's very familiar with. And they flood little salt flats, little retention ponds, and they harvest the salt after solar dehydrating it, solar drying it. And what's great about this and Baja Gold is that this is free flowing ocean water that was free flowing water 6 months ago. It was a very fresh, living body of water that is dehydrated by the sun. There's no additional processing, there's no additives, there's no bleaching, there's no chemical agents or anything of that nature. And so it's the closest possible representation of the mineral content of the ocean. And depending on that ocean water source, you're going to have maybe a little bit more minerals, maybe a little bit less sodium. And I know Celtic offers a couple of different, they have like light gray, but then they have a Hawaiian salt. And
Right.
so they have different areas of the world where they harvest salt. But Baja Gold is going to be very similar in style to Celtic. Where we are different and where we believe we are superior to any other salt is where we harvest has more minerals and trace elements and a reduced sodium level. So in terms of truly balanced, nutrient-rich sea salt, Baja Gold and C90 are going to offer the greatest amounts of that minerality than anything else. And so this is a long way of looking at, there's two factors that you can use to consider when looking at salts. It's going to be your sodium level, which is usually directly correlated to the other minerality of the salt. So you have 100% of volume in any given container. If 99% of that volume is sodium chloride, you can only have 1% of anything else. Baja Gold, for instance, has about 75 to 80% sodium chloride, which leaves you significantly more quote unquote room in that salt crystal for other minerals and trace elements. And if you go down the line and look at your magnesium compared to pink Himalayan or your potassium compared to some of these other salts, you'll see that difference there.
I love the mineral rich aspect of Baja Gold and the fact that you're saying that there's 75 to 80% of sodium chloride, which leaves more room per se
Yes.
for the minerals. And I think in my research, I found that Baja Gold actually has one of the highest amounts of trace minerals available in the salt,
Yes,
right?
we believe we have the greatest mineral abundance of any salt.
Yeah. And one of the things that I talk about is always biodiversity and having diversity. And I'm not talking about stick to one thing. If it's Himalayan salt, if it's sea salt, if it's definitely, I don't recommend table salt at all. Like avoid that by any means. But having the diversity for your gut, and I talk about this in fermentation too. If you normally eat sauerkraut, add some kimchi, add some
Mhm.
different vegetables, add some vegetables that you're able to grow on your land and start fermenting that because all of the different microbes, it's going to make your microbiome much stronger. And in
100%.
this, yeah, in the same way, I see salt as that too. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are like diehard one type of one brand, one salt. And for me, we personally use Baja Gold. I love your coarse salt when I make kimchi and I teach how to make kimchi. I'm talking about Baja Gold just mainly because it reminds me of the salt that I grew up with on a more mineral rich and unrefined salt way. For kimchi, we like to have it where it's coarse and it
Mhm.
can draw out the liquids inside the vegetable, but
Mhm.
also not just stay there and make it extra salty. And so we highly recommend Baja Gold. Personally, what we use for any of our ferments, especially kimchi. One of the things that I did want to talk about too, while you were talking about pink Himalayan, is the sourcing.
Mm.
Because in all of my research, not just in salt, but in food and how we're sourcing, and thank you for the Salt 101 because that was a lot more information than I started with. But I had looked into salt. That was actually one of the first things that I looked into when my daughter was starting to eat solid food. So 14 years ago, she just turned 14 last week. And so that's when I know how long it's been since I've been on this food journey because I didn't really have my eyes opened until I had her. Before then, my mom bought, we talked about this before we recorded, but the Morton iodized salt because
Mhm.
she that in our Asian culture, you just tell each other about one new salt and one thing and nobody questions it. That's the one we go with. But that's equivalent to me, that's equivalent to table salt.
Right. Yep.
And so one of the first things that we did was we switched out our salt to a mineral rich, unrefined salt that was honoring more of the traditional diet and the regenerative practices that is still very important to us. But in the same way, I always talk about sourcing, right? Sourcing where your meat comes from, sourcing where your dairy comes from. And because we've started asking these questions 14 years ago is the main reason why 14 years later we are now on a 40-acre farm and we have our own dairy cows and we raise our own
That's amazing.
animals and starting to look into really implementing salt into not just our work in the kitchen but also on the soil for our animals and for our plants. And so I want to talk definitely more about that. But sourcing is really important. And we talk about the pink Himalayan salt. I think that was one of my biggest concerns was when I started seeing pink Himalayan salt available at TJ Maxx.
Ooh,
And
yes.
then I started questioning, okay, then there's something more to this because I need to start looking into how pink Himalayan salt is being sourced.
Yes, yep. That's probably the most challenging one, just given how many I have not been there, but from what I've read and understand, there are so many mines, there are so many miners, and then there are different companies that are sourcing it and then relabeling it. And it's hard to it's hard to know kind of where your pink Himalayan salt truly comes from.
Correct. Yeah, that has always been my reservation. So from that point on, we just stopped using pink Himalayan salt. I'm sure there's other trace minerals and there's a clean source, but for us, we choose to go more of the unrefined and trusted sources.
And
So
this is where, and I'll plug them because I know them well and they're a great American company. Redmond is if you are dead set on a pink style salt, choose Redmond. And that's the Baja guy saying that. If that's really what you're looking for, please buy Redmond. Don't buy pink Himalayan salt because we know where it comes from. It comes from here in America and Utah. What I would tell you on top of that is Baja Gold is going to have significantly more minerals and trace elements than Redmond will, but I would purchase them before pink Himalayan. That's my point.
and I thank you for that. We also use Redmond. And I wouldn't say that Redmond we can't consider them to be pink Himalayan because it's not from the Himalayan area.
Correct.
But
Right.
you're correct. They do have this pink tint to it, and it's
Mhm.
from the minerals from iron. But yeah, and we have had the opportunity to go out to their location and can verify the sourcing of it. It is this one mine that they own, and really great team out there as
Yeah,
well.
good people. Yep.
Yes. Okay, so to that point, you were talking about how table salt is bleached to be white. Now,
Mhm.
Baja Gold salt is very
It's whiter
white.
than people think it should be. Yes.
So tell me a little bit more
Yes. So
about
let's
that.
talk
How are
about
you
that.
able to achieve that
So
without?
most people's experience with unrefined mineral sea salt is a Celtic style salt, a French style salt. My understanding of what I've viewed from media and whatnot from those locations is that they have relatively small salt ponds. If you've ever seen the picture of the raker in there in the mine in the salt pond raking the salt, they don't look to be that much bigger than maybe 9 feet by 9 feet or 15 feet around. So they're relatively compact, and then they have a lot of them stacked up like a chessboard or something like that. The gray color, and this is my understanding of this, the gray color is coming from the surrounding clay edges that are built to hold the water while it is drying into the salt. The edges and the bottom of that pond are typically clay lined. And when you have a relatively small surface area, you're going to have more of that clay in the salt, in the water, and then in the salt itself. That's my understanding. In Baja Gold and C90's case, our retention ponds or salt flats, whatever term you prefer to use, are 1 acre in size. So they are about the size of a football field for each one. So instead of being, we'll be generous and call them 20 feet by 20 feet for Celtic. And I do think they're smaller than that. Instead of being that size, we are talking about a true football field size retention pond. And what we have done for Baja Gold in particular is we only harvest Baja Gold from the very center of the retention ponds that are dedicated to Baja Gold. And so that allows our salt to be a little bit more pure. You have less of that clay in the salt product itself, and it results in a much brighter, whiter sea salt itself. So that is the story there.
Okay, that's great because I was going to ask you your retention ponds. Do you, outside of just Baja Gold, if you're saying that the center is the most pure and how you're able to get that white grains of pure Baja Gold salt, all of the surrounding areas within that retention pond, are you then reselling that to other brands?
We do not. No, we do not. We are the only providers of salt from our location in Mexico there. Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
Yes.
And then the other thing, when we're talking about trace minerals, I know going back to what you said, how Baja Gold has the highest amount of trace minerals of other competing brands or any others that are marketed as more natural or mineral rich. Do you, off the top of your head, know what the other minerals are present in C90 and Baja Gold that may not be present in other salts?
So I think it's not only the specific minerals themselves, but then also the abundance of those minerals. So it's how much magnesium do you have relative to others? Everyone will have magnesium. We will have over a percentage of magnesium per gram of salt. So in addition to that, yes, we have, and it's hard to find labs that will really do a robust mineral analysis, but we have found that you can detect 60, 70, 80 minerals and trace elements within Baja Gold and C90. And it's the combination of the presence, but then also the abundance that gives us what we believe is the greatest kind of total minerality of any sea salt.
Okay. Okay. And now just going back to the question I had asked you before about the retention pond, how do you decipher the difference between what's human consumption and animal consumption?
Yes. So I want to start this by saying we take very good care of our C90 product. And what I'm going to say does not in any way mean that what we provide for C90 is not a very premium, very cared for product. That said, there are differences between agriculture grade products and human consumption products. The amount of filtration that we have on Baja Gold ponds in particular is significantly more robust because it is being fed to humans. And so we have not only additional filtration that goes into them, there is more testing, and I'll use the term like security and monitoring around the Baja Gold ponds, because it's very important to us that we provide a best in class, clean, pure, and pristine product for people that are feeding it to their families and consuming it as part of their nutrient rich lifestyles. On the C90 side of things, we do a robust amount of testing as well, but there is more, it's sometimes is a little bit of a more gray salt. There's more leniency in terms of, okay, this is a good and a best in class C90 product versus this might not quite make the grade for Baja Gold. If that makes sense, that's the ponds themselves. And then where there's another difference as well is just an agriculture grade facility has different rules and regulations than an FDA grade human wellness facility that we operate Baja Gold out of. C90, again, it's a beautiful facility. It's a custom built facility to package C90 ocean minerals. There are certain parts of it that are just not food grade standards. And we always tell people, make sure that if you're looking to enjoy one of our salts, C90 is great for your garden. Baja Gold is really great for your family.
Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with the differences between human consumption and the ag side. That's why I was visually imagining if the surrounding areas of that retention pond would be what you would consider more.
Yes, it is not actually. No, the ponds themselves all started the same. And it's more of, we do have a little bit more filtration on the Baja Gold side. There is more scrutiny around when we are flooding those ponds, when we are harvesting out of them, where in the pond we are actually harvesting. Like I mentioned, the middle of the ponds.
Yeah.
But the source water from the Sea of Cortez that is brought in over that alluvial topsoil, it is the same originating seawater, and the ponds themselves are built in the same way. And so, yeah, the C90 is, I can't wait to talk agriculture and agronomy and whatnot, but the C90 business was the origin and the genesis of what we do at C Agri. Baja Gold was a very fortunate addition to the business after the fact. It actually started because many of our farmers wrote and said they loved their C90 for themselves and on their steaks. And they'd be trying to cook dinner and they'd have this 50-pound bag of livestock salt in the kitchen. And that led to many an argument. And we said, okay, why don't we make something a little bit better for the kitchen and for the table there? So that led to Baja Gold.
That's perfect, because I was going to go ahead and segue into the ag side of the business and talk about C90, because how I had first heard of C90 was through looking and playing around with KNF, which is Korean natural farming. And I think when we met, I just briefly talked about it. But C90 is basically, if we're in Tennessee, so we are landlocked. I have zero access to seawater. And unless I'm driving out to maybe Myrtle Beach and collecting some, but I definitely don't want to be bringing that home. So C90 is the solution for me to make my own. And I've been crazy enough to think about that. But C90 has been the solution for me to play around with it. And I know when you and I talked, there were two potential products that I could use for my OHN or my ferments for Korean natural farming. But maybe if you can give kind of the brief overview of C90, how that started and how that is a superior product. There's quite a few products that when we met, we were talking about, and one that I would love to try when our cows are back. And it's now November when we're filming, but come July, we're going to definitely want to use the garlic salt for fly management.
Yes, 100%. And even start loading it earlier than that. But we'll put a plan together.
Okay.
So C90, I love talking about C90. So C90 started with a doctor named Dr. Maynard Murray. And maybe we can link in the show notes a little bit about Dr. Murray and this book that he wrote that really chronicled his entire adventures in agronomy and in sea energy agriculture. And that was the name of his book, Sea Energy Agriculture. Dr. Maynard Murray is a ear, nose, and throat specialist in the 40s and 50s. And he looks around and the world seems to be advancing technologically. We are, building rockets. We're starting to think about computers. We're starting to do all of these things as a species. But at the same time, it seems as though farming is going in a weird direction, and the overall health of his patients, because he was a doctor, the health of his patients was either flatlining or going down. And he said, it just seems weird to me that we're doing all of these great things everywhere else, but we have greater and greater percentages of cancer. We have greater and greater percentages of cellular disease that are inflicting my patients. And so what is going on here? I need to better understand what is driving this. And so two things he eventually discovered two different things. One is there was a direct correlation in the rise of conventional agriculture that prioritized an NPK style of growth and yield over anything else, correlating directly with a decline in the nutrient density of our nation's food supply. And that was everything from the minerality of milk, the minerality of meat in animals, then all the way down to cereal grains and the pasture grass that those animals were grazing on. And ultimately, and they didn't quite know this at the time, but ultimately the soil minerality as well and what was going on under their feet. And we had seen this a little bit. There was the infamous Dust Bowl activities that occurred in the early part of the 1900s, where over farming and monocropping led to all of that topsoil being eventually, essentially just washed away. And then you have just all of this dry dust and you have the Dust Bowl, and you can look into that a little bit more. But it was the precursor to, oh, if we don't take care of our soil, really devastating things can happen to the people that are farming and to the food supply that we are creating. So that was one thing that he, in conjunction with other researchers, discovered. He also found that, and many other people were studying this at the time, but he discovered this idea that salt water is not just salt water. It is an incredible mineral rich solution that actually contains all of the minerals and trace elements on the periodic table in this perfect balance. And because of that minerality, he started to look at marine life and the health of marine life. And it seemed to him at that time that marine life was much healthier than land-based life. And he couldn't tell exactly why that was, but he hypothesized living in this mineral environment, maybe it's the presence of all these minerals that really can lead to healthier cells. And there's a famous example in the book, and I forget exactly which type of fish it was, but there's a type of a trout or something that can live in both brackish water and true seawater, true ocean water. And the fish that lived in that pure mineral rich seawater would be healthier and would have less cellular disease than the ones that lived in either brackish water or fresh water. And same species, DNA is very similar, if not identical, but the ones that are placed in this mineral rich environment would lead longer, healthier lives. And so he said, okay, this is really interesting. It seems as though there's this like miracle solution covering, 90% of the planet. How can we use this to remineralize, revitalize our soils, and ultimately grow more nutrient rich vegetables and so on down the food chain? And so Dr. Murray actually at one point left his practice and started up a farm in Florida where he started doing robust research around using ocean water to provide the nutrient solution for hydroponics and then ultimately for soil-based growing as well. And his trials were, as trials go, you start with a lot of ocean water, and he found very quickly, okay, you can't use gallons and gallons of ocean water. You have to dilute it to the right level and use the right amount. But once he got that locked in, he found that you can grow incredibly mineral rich, high bricks, vegetables, fruits, and ultimately pasture grass and cereal crops and row crops using ocean minerals as a nutrient source. Now, there are some cases where you do need to add in some level of nitrogen, but in most cases, ocean minerals can provide a very large percentage of the nutrients that you need for your soil and for whatever it is you may be growing. Now, fast forward a couple of years after trying to figure out how to bring ocean water into Middle America, he realized it's really hard to bring tankers and tankers of ocean water from the Atlantic Ocean into, let's say, Illinois, where we grow a lot of corn and beans. And he discovered that you can actually concentrate seawater into what he called sea solids and what we now know today as unrefined sea salts. And he found that there were unique parts of the world that were better equipped to create mineral rich sea solids. And the reason I say that is that when you look through the history of what now is C90, the Baja Peninsula was identified by Dr. Murray as the most mineral rich environment on the planet to create these sea solids. And so there was research done in the 70s and 80s to source sea solids. There was a bit of a break from the 80s until the early 2000s around this technology in general. And then the founder of Sea Agri, Robert Kane, who actually studied at the hydroponics farm in Florida with Dr. Murray, he rejuvenated and resuscitated this entire concept in 2003 went back down into the Baja and reestablished this source. And the rest is history now. So C90 has been used now in modern agriculture since 2003. And we provide minerals and trace elements for all parts of the agriculture spectrum. We strongly believe in soil remineralization, which is the direct broadcast application of sea solids onto your soil. But we also have products that are designed for liquefaction, for drip irrigation, for foliar feeding, things of that nature. We have a robust animal health line as well with a mineral salt for livestock. We mix in things like garlic for fly, flea, and tick control. And then we have a couple of other products as well. But the genesis and the core of everything that we do is built on this sea solid technology that Dr. Murray quite literally discovered, invented, whatever term you wish to use, in the 50s and 60s. And we are now today able to bring that onto more acreage and more farms than ever before.
Michael, that is mind blowing to me, what you just talked about with Dr. Murray's research. And while you're telling the story, I was imagining all of the whales and the dolphins and the fish that exist in the ocean today, and how you never really we obviously don't see them. We're not domesticating them at all, but they've got to be pretty healthy where they're at versus, and I think about the cattle that we raise, and they are healthy, but we do put quite a bit of work into them to keep them healthy.
Yeah.
And we rotate them, and there's a lot of hands-on with them, but it's a beautiful way that God has made it perfect for the animals in the ocean to be completely self-sufficient. They grow into much larger than our cattle, and they're self-sufficient without any of the human inputs needed. And so it's just mind-blowing that, of course, naturally, why don't we harvest some of what already exists in the form of sea solids and start implementing them into our grasses and our gardens and our livestock? It just seems nobody's talked about that. But to your point about the bricks, we test our soil, we test our vegetables, and we test our plants, and it just makes sense. And to test the grass too. But we use basic levels of C90 to be completely transparent, where we are just diluting it so that I'm not carrying seawater from the ocean and making a separate trip to come back. But now I really do want to try to see if there are other ways that we could use that sea solid technology to improve the health of our soil, our grasses, and then as a foliar, even as the plants are growing.
Yes. Your idea on the blue whales, I think this is in Dr. Murray's book. Someone did a study where they looked at an adult blue whale, like a cell from an adult blue whale, and they compared it to a young blue whale, and they were virtually indistinguishable. Whereas if you look at just a human being, an adult human being cell, there's signs of degeneration, of course, relative to a child. And what that is a testament to is just the mineralities, vitality that it provides to these animals throughout these extended lifespans, so that they are just not as susceptible to disease and breakdown the way that land-based life is.
Gosh, that's just makes me want to throw some salt planned, of course, and into the soil and improve the health of our soil and our vegetables and then our animals much more. Do you have recommendations on dilutions of the sea solids and usage? And I don't know the full breadth of your C90 line, so maybe you can just walk me through that.
Yes, absolutely. If you are interested in C90, please go to our website. It's sea-90.com, and there is a robust applications overview. The reason I say that is because C90 is truly for anyone. We have partners that are farming 100,000 acres of corn and beans, and they're relatively conventional farmers, but they use C90 because they've seen the power of it. We have smaller scale homesteaders who are very regenerative focused and very organic focused. And then we have someone who has a 4x4 raised bed on their apartment balcony that they're just trying to grow a little bit of healthier food for themselves. So we can provide solutions for all of those different applications. But just starting with that soil treatment, because that was Dr. Murray's goal. It was, how do we remineralize soil? How do we restore and rejuvenate from the damage that has been done from some of these conventional techniques that we've now been in the mix with for about 100 years or so, with synthetic fertilization, with monocropping, and various other factors. So C90 as a soil treatment you're going to be looking at about 100 pounds per acre from a broadcast perspective. Now, if you have extremely mineral deficient soil, really challenged soil, you can go as high as so we have partners that'll do 500 or even 1,000 pounds per acre as a one-time application to really shock that system and bring that minerality and some of that life back into the system. But for the most part, if you are a scale farmer, about 100 pounds per acre is our recommendation. We do have recommendations. I don't have it off the top of my head, but for 3D mixed soil, that's because the 100 pounds per acre is a flat broadcast spread. If you are mixing like cubic feet worth of soil into raised beds or something of that nature, you can actually put a little bit more in because you are able to impact the depth of that soil as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's your soil mineralizer approach. The next product would be our foliar application, and this is the one that we've talked about. So this is something that is immediately liquefied. It immediately goes into solution because it was ocean water 6 months ago or less. So it's very happy to go back into solution. It's very bioavailable for the soil, for plant tissue, for animals. So this is something that you can foliar feed. Again, if you are an at-scale farmer, 3 to 5 pounds per acre, 3 to 5 times per year, depending on what you're growing, whether it's corn and beans or if you're raising pasture grass. But that's something that you can run off the back of a 4x4 with a sprayer or a massive boom sprayer, depending on the acreage that you're running. It can also be liquefied and put through a drip irrigation system, a drench system, any type of application method that you're working with we typically have a solution for you. So that's going to be our agronomy approach. You can do both or only one of those two methods. A lot of people have the biggest question we get is, I don't get it. You're asking me to spread salt on my land. I read in the Bible about not doing that. Help me understand, Michael. I don't understand what you're telling me to do here. There's a couple of things in there. One is there is a massive difference between C90 and, again, hate to do it, but Morton's table salt,
Morton's
like
table
pure,
salt. Yeah, I was gonna
pure,
say.
pure sodium chloride. We've actually done greenhouse tests using the same applications of C90 and Morton's, and the plant tissue like shrivels up with Morton's, and the C90 plant tissue thrives. And the difference is a more balanced sodium level, but it's also paired with all of those minerals and trace elements. And the soil and the plant tissue and the animal tissue knows what to do and knows the power that those mineral nutrients bring. And it's not just the magnesium, it's mineral number 42, and how even at parts per billion levels, it helps unlock something in the DNA of that plant tissue or in the genetic makeup of that animal. You are applying a mineral rich sea salt. You're not just spreading table salt the way you spread salt if it's snowing outside or anything of that nature. It's a very different product. And the amount of C90 that you're using is a relatively conservative amount. 100 pounds per acre. You are not drenching your land with C90, but it does have the power within each one of those salt crystals to bring some of that vitality back into your soil. Now, I say that in 75 to 80% of cases, it's very appropriate and helpful to broadcast spread C90. There are parts of our country and of the world that have a very saline rich soil matrix. And so in those cases, and I'm thinking the Pacific Northwest can be a little bit high in sodium in their soil. In those cases, if you've done a soil test and you feel like your sodium level is a little bit higher than you prefer, you don't want to broadcast the C90, you can actually use a foliar application and impact the health and the growth of that year's harvest. Whether you're growing grass or you're growing row crops or fruits and vegetables, you can just foliar spray onto that plant tissue, not have to necessarily worry about elevated soil levels, and you're still going to see wonderful results.
That's fantastic. To that point, do you have any soil tests available, or do you have any that you recommend?
Yes, so there are a couple of different soil tests that we work with. Midwest Labs is a partner of ours, both on the mineral analysis standpoint of our products and soil, and I believe they do some plant tissue as well. So there's going to be your basic soil tests that are going to give you base saturation of different elements, CEC levels, and various other markers that are going to be really helpful for you as a farmer. And their team is really wonderful to work with. There are others as well within the agriculture community that the testing has become more and more important and more accessible, which is really wonderful for everyone from the backyard gardener all the way up to a very large farmer So there's a lot of accessibility for this. You can take a look at it. The first thing you'll want to look at is your CEC levels and your sodium levels. And in most cases, again, just because the prevailing thought has been sodium should be zero, in most cases, many people are actually deficient in sodium levels in their soil relative to what we have seen deliver successful results. And there is such a concern over sodium levels that everyone wants to drive it all the way down to zero. The most productive soil is actually going to be in that 1 to 3% base saturation level for sodium. And so take a look at your sodium level. I think you'd be surprised that it's probably a little bit lower than it should be. And a little bit of C90, that sodium source and that minerality, is going to help supercharge that soil and bring your productivity up. And I want to touch quickly on the soil itself. And I know we're running on time here, but you had mentioned earlier about gut health and how everything ties back into enzymatic activity and bacteria and fungi and whatnot. It's important to note that C90 is not necessarily feeding the plants when you broadcast it onto this soil. What it's doing is actually feeding the soil itself, and more specifically, the soil microbiome, which is that underground network of fungi and bacteria and enzymes that are actually working together. And those are the pieces that then produce things and secrete things to feed the plants themselves. And so there's one step removed, if that makes sense, from the plant tissue itself. There's a conversion as well into, I think it's either inorganic or organic matter that the plant tissue can actually take up from the soil itself. That is very similar to what goes on in your gut as well. If you don't have the mineral nutrition in your gut or in the rumen of the animals that you're raising, they also can't deliver on their genetic potential. They can't be the best version of themselves. So this idea of gut health, and I love that modern medicine, we're starting to talk about gut health relative to mental health and relative to just physical performance. It's all the same all the way down to the soil. So the same way you need your gut to be healthy as a human, your microbiome, it's a fancy word for the gut of the soil, also needs to be in peak performance. It needs to be fed the right fuel. And that goes all the way up through your livestock and ultimately human beings.
Oh, Michael, you said that perfectly. That's what I preach about all day. And so that is fantastic. I completely agree with that, that there's actually studies have shown there's the same microbiome that you find in the soil that you find in your gut. And so it's like synergistic. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote The Nourishing Asian Kitchen. And the second book that I'm writing is The Nourishing Asian Homestead. And that's to talk about the entire loop and system about really how we should be living and how we should be eating. And so I have one last question, and that's just to round out the integration with C90 and livestock systems, specifically for the dairy cattle and your garlic salt. You had just touched on that briefly about the fly, flea, and tick. Say that fast 3 times. But the management of that, and typically we will apply it around June and July, but you're saying to take care of that even further. And I think that now makes sense because of just the gut.
Yes. So a couple of things. One, by feeding a mineral rich sea salt, you are giving the animal the fuel that it needs to help support against kind of predators like that on its own. So the overall health of the animal is going to be elevated. An interesting parallel to this is Brix levels in plant tissue. What we've found is that customers who use C90 and help elevate their Brix levels, pests like grasshoppers and whatnot will actually leave those fields alone because they know inherently higher Brix levels mean sugars that they cannot digest. And there's natural selection that goes on. And so they will move past a elevated Brix field for one that is in less good of shape. So a little bit of the C90 on its own, forgetting about the garlic, will help your cattle and will help your animals as well. What we've introduced with the garlic, and it's an organic, it's actually a food grade garlic. It's a very good garlic source. There was a study done that adding garlic into the rumen of the animal, because of how rumens function, the aromatic nature of that garlic helps to repel flies, fleas, and ticks. And so the reason that it's not a see a fly and apply it type of method is that you actually do need to have that garlic kind of ruminating, no pun intended, and aromatically working within that animal for a good couple of weeks before fly season. Because if you wait until you see a fly, it might be a little bit too late. You're playing catch up at that point.
Yeah.
So if you can, as soon as you start to see spring turn, transition to the garlic version of C90, you're going to have better luck with preventative measures of flies, fleas, and ticks.
Oh, that's perfect. And that makes perfect sense. And what you're talking about, you're seeing the BRICS levels testing in ruminants and livestock. We see that with plants too.
Right.
If you can
Yes.
improve, right? Like I'll have a sacrificial kale plant, for example, and I know that's probably an area of soil I need to improve on. But the same thing also, I believe, applies to us humans.
Mm.
Our same thing with like disease and pests. And by improving our gut health, we don't really find ourselves getting a cold as often as we used to before we really focused on our gut. Well, I would just want to thank you so much, Michael, for your time. You're just such a huge wealth of knowledge. And I knew this when I met you. We only had 5-10 minutes together, but you were just so interesting that I said, we have to just take this online so that everybody else can hear the conversation too. And I'm not one to shy away from the tough questions. And so I really appreciate you for entertaining that right off the bat.
Of course, yes. It was all easy from there.
But we do have a discount code to share out to our listeners. So if you're here listening and you really want to try out either Baja Gold or C90, we'll have the links below for you to click. And I think, Michael, the code is Good Soil, and the
Yep.
discount is 10% off of your entire purchase.
Correct. Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. And do you want to go ahead and lead people can get more information with either Baja Gold? All the studies that you reference is impeccable. So I think that, and then where they can go to get the ag side of salt.
Yes, absolutely. So let's start with the ag side. Visit C90.com. That's SEA-90.com. We have a ton of research, a ton of articles there. We do have a mini shop as well. You can actually find all of the products, but what's more important is actually the research and the history of this. There's a copy of Sea Energy Agriculture on there. Dr. Maynard Murray actually gave the keynote presentation at Acres USA in 1976, I want to say.
Wow.
And we have an audio recording of that, which is really cool to hear. So I'm glad we preserved that. But there's all the way up through recent interviews and whatnot with farmers using C90 within modern practices. All of your application questions are on there as well. So if you are looking for how to use C90 within poultry, within gardening, we actually do a little bit of work in aquaponics and in aquariums as well. You can recreate really mineral rich seawater essentially with C90, which makes sense. All of that is available on there. And then for Baja Gold, it's BajaGoldSaltCo.com, which is a bit of a long name there, but we'll link it below so you can just click on it. And all of the mineral reports that I mentioned are on there. The lab results, if you do want to take a closer look at that, all of that is transparently published. It is the direct PDFs from our lab partners. And then more information on all of our different products is on there as well. And for all of this, I would just say I'm really grateful for these types of opportunities. You met with our whole family. We're a family-run business. It's a small team, small but mighty. And if anyone ever has any questions, I always just tell them, please email or call us. You'll get a real human being and someone who really cares about, really tries to put our best foot forward and do the best we can with this. If you have any questions, any concerns, anything of any nature, you can reach out to our team and we will help you.
Thank you so much, Michael. You're a wealth of knowledge. And I just thank you so much for representing salt so well. And in this stage of life where we're looking to restore balance in everything, right? From our own health to our animals' health and to our plant health, and realizing that minerals are more than just nutrients, they're part of a living system. And just like biodiversity is in the field, mineral diversity builds long-term vitality. So I really appreciate your time, Michael, and really look forward to diving into all of the studies that you referenced and that book too. We'll have a link out to Dr. Murray's book down below in the show notes. So thank you again for your time tonight. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Michael at Baja Gold, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.